Okay, and John, let's go over to, there's been all kinds of news about this 1.2 billion passwords and usernames that have been hacked by presumably the Russians. I'm not exactly sure how we've concluded that those are, the Russians are actually behind this, but nevertheless, somebody has lots and lots of usernames and passwords. Now, what do we do about it?
So, right, and I'm not going to get into the details of that particular incident because this happens all the time, right? There's these big caches of login credentials that get harvested by various malicious actors. Sometimes they get distributed in underground, et cetera, et cetera. More often than not, those lists of harvested credentials, login credentials, is usually because whoever's machine that is, their computer, has become infected. There's a keylogger on there that captured it and sent it up to some command and control. It's usually not that the websites have been hacked and somebody's pulled down a big cache of logins and passwords from the websites themselves. In any event, there's an article that was put out here, and there were some actually, I thought, pretty decent recommendations from one of McAfee's security experts. And I thought we'd just go through them really quickly here, because we talk about this all the time, but it's nice to see it in a list. So you got to go through them, because we kind of hit them one or two at a time on our shows usually. But the first one, never leave a router on its default password. We talk about that all the time. Even beyond that, don't leave default passwords on anything, not just your router. Especially like your DVR or the webcam DVRs that we've talked about, or other types of devices, your NASs, your Synology disk station manager NASs, things like that. Don't leave default passwords on anything.
And I don't want to take anything away from that recommendation. I think it's actually spot on. Is it really relevant here?
Well, that's a good point.
Yes, it is, because that's one way in the past that folks have managed to intercept some of these passwords is by compromising the home routers.
Well, you're right. You're right, Jim. I guess I'm perhaps being just a little bit picky here, and I don't mean to take away from the recommendations again. But the significance here, and maybe it's just a lack of detailed information about where these passwords were harvested from. My understanding is they were harvested, as you mentioned, from websites, which presumably people have gone and registered at a website for something or other, not associated with routers or home devices necessarily. So it seems to me that there are some aspects of these recommendations that are just perhaps a little bit beyond the context of the thing and of this particular event, and that's perfectly fine. I just want to make sure that we're not confusing the audience to suggest that fixing this is going to fix anything related to the billion passwords that have presumably been stolen.
No, but when we talk about login credential harvesting, there's I can think of three main ways, right? Either the end device gets compromised, so my PC got infected with something that's keylogging, recording it. Absolutely. The next layer, like we were just talking about, is maybe something in between. So between me talking to wherever I'm trying to get to has been compromised, like your home router, or maybe a Wi-Fi hotspot, or something like that where my traffic's crossing over. And then probably the last point would be the actual endpoint that I'm trying to talk to, like the website has been compromised and those credentials have been harvested from there.
So to help prevent future passwords from being stolen.
Right. Okay. So it's, there's a whole gamut of points of contact that your passwords, logins and passwords pass through between your machine and where it ends up. And we're kind of trying to cover maybe those bases, so to speak. Very good. Like you said, they're not really talking about, it really hasn't been stated where this 1 billion harvested accounts have come from. And I'm not going to speculate because I don't really know. I don't know if websites have been actually hacked and the credentials have been harvested, or if it's a big cache of data from keylog infected machines that have all been scooped up into one big pile.
Fair point.
I don't know.
Fair point.
I don't, until we hear from the company that reported this, with some more information, then we really don't know.
Okay.
But anyway, getting back to some of these, never trust free third-party Wi-Fi hotspots. Again, that's kind of the in the middle kind of thing. Consider using some kind of VPN service. If you have one, instead of just being on like an open Wi-Fi. Right. When you're using a website to do financial transactions, always make sure that it's HTTPS, so that even if you are on something open, at least between your machine and the website itself, the connection's encrypted. So be pretty difficult for somebody to,
Right.
be a man in the middle and get your login and password that way.
Well, and I'm
Not
gonna,
impossible, but harder.
Right. And I'm going to add, just pay attention to the pop-ups. If you get a pop-up that says, we don't understand what the certificate's for, it's expired or something along those lines, that means something. And particularly if you have a high-value transaction that you're performing or sensitive information that you're sharing.
Right. Just because it's encrypted or you see the padlock doesn't mean that it's the SSL certificate's for the actual site you're trying to go to. It could be a rogue one like we talked about before. So you want to make sure that it's actually signed and trusted and whatnot.
Absolutely.
From a reputable signer. Then they mention be sure to keep your antivirus browser operating system updated. We talk about that all the time. That's not going to be the complete panacea for all this, because as we know, most malware, the day it comes out, is not recognized by most antivirus. So if you're hit on day one of this malware being distributed, maybe through email and whatnot, you're probably stuck, infected, until maybe an update comes along in a couple of days or so. Generally speaking.
Right.
Never click on links in emails. We talk about that all the time. Even if it's supposedly from your bank, or even supposedly from a friend, or something that seems like, oh, this is probably innocuous, or it may not be. It could be an illegitimate, malicious attachment or executable or something that's trying to infect your machine.
So rather than click on the link, if your bank's telling you to go do something, go directly to the bank website,
to the bank via your
and
web
then
browser.
find out what they're telling you there, because more often than not, you're going to be able to recognize it. They usually have a messaging service or something to let you know.
Right.
Or give them a call.
Right. Yeah. Use two-step verification for whatever website. They say for email, social networking, but basically anything that you can use, like two-factor authentication, where you have kind of a one-time password. Maybe it gets texted to you. I know my bank does that. A lot of other high-value websites have some kind of out-of-band two-factor authentication. If it's available, I would recommend using that, because that makes it a lot more difficult for somebody to compromise your account.
And most, as I understand, most places they aren't really pushing that. You have to kind of go ask for it.
Yeah, you usually got to check.
And just the mere, even if they don't have it, going and asking for it would help to at least indicate
let them
that
know
you have
that,
a desire.
Yeah, that more people are interested in it, and that might be the impetus behind them implementing that in their service. And then use a password manager to keep track of your passwords. Don't use the same password on every website. Use different passwords with some diversity. Store them in some kind of password manager so you don't forget them. Anyway, I thought it was some useful tips there, because there have been a lot of account credential harvesting. People ask questions all the time. What am I supposed to do about this? There's no real knowledge on this particular one. What's been scooped up in it? I'm not going to tell people to go change your passwords on all your websites, because I don't know, right?
Right.
But it's always good to have some kind of change your passwords on a regular basis anyway. I would recommend, monthly or every couple of months on each website to change your password.
I think to sort of put this in context, 1 billion passwords seems like an awful lot. And, well, it actually is. It's an awful lot. But if you put it into context, there are an awful lot of sites that have at least registration, username and password opportunities for folks. I know I have literally hundreds of different passwords for different kinds of things that are for different. So if you dilute that across the the entire population base, it's really not that big of a number.
Right.
It's a big number, but it's not that big of a number. It's not quite as catastrophic as you might first anticipate. And most of the sites are most likely very innocuous, and at least the word is that that information's been used for spamming operations and hasn't necessarily been used in other contexts. And there may be no real other sensitive information associated with a lot of those. They haven't said anything about credit card information or social security numbers, that sort of thing. So, it's an important consideration. I'm just a little bit skeptical, and there was it was sort of a taste of that at the beginning of our discussion here about the severity of this particular event. It's not just the numbers; it's the kinds of things associated, that surround it. And maybe I'm reading too far into it, but my understanding was that basically it was a case where they were scanning around the internet and targeting websites they were opportunistic, ones that are probably not well managed, and you at least like to think are not as ones with as much valuable information as perhaps others, financial institutions and others that are paying more attention, have PCI requirements and that sort of thing. So this is speculation somewhat on my part, but I don't think this is quite as serious as perhaps it's gotten in terms of media attention.
I agree. I think the number is what scared people, or was the headline to the story.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
I don't know that it's not really any different than if someone said 10,000 passwords got stolen, because
Yeah.
And one of the things is, until we get some more information from the folks who've reported this, they really haven't released much yet. So until we get more information, I agree, it's not time to panic.
So the one thing I would say about, if it is credentials harvested from websites that were vulnerable, even if they were low value ones, that's a good case where make sure you use a different password on different sites, because if your login ID is your email address or something that could be tied to another maybe higher value website, and you're using the same password there, then that's not a good thing.
Yeah, and one of the things I should point out is that this information likely has been sold to others with other motives.
Right.
We talked about the spamming. That would be perhaps one organization doing a certain set of things and focusing in a particular area that monetizes information in their way, but there are likely others that that information would be sold to with exactly the kind of thing you'd be looking, that you'd pointed out, perhaps using it for password guessing attacks or and other venues.
Just think how many, what kind of gains you could get if you're, into breaking individual passwords. If you got 1.6 or however many billion that you can feed in as potentials.
Right. Absolutely. It's a good point, Matt.